name is Stephanie. I got kidnapped when I was 8 years old, and now I'm 18. But the thing is, I managed to escape my captors. They were basically my mom and dad for 10 years, but they treated me like I was dirt. Mom just got drunk and high every night, and my dad did the same when he wasn't beating up on my mom. I am lost and found personified. That day I walked up to my home, I felt a mixture of happiness that I was home and sadness about missing 10 years with my parents. When I first knocked on the door, I recognized my mom's face, but noticed there were 10 years of strain and worry on her face. I felt a pang of guilt knowing it was over me, but it wasn't my fault. I was just a kid, and kids go missing every day. It isn't their fault, of course. My mom asked me could she help me with anything, thinking I was a stranger. I said, "Mom, it's Stephanie." My mom gave a shocked look as soon as I said it, but a couple of minutes later we spoke in the living room for what felt like hours. I was tired, all I wanted to do was fall asleep. Then the next day, an FBI agent called to the house. He wanted to speak to me. I didn't want to speak to anyone. I just wanted to curl up in a ball and fall asleep for weeks. The FBI agent said to me, "Hi Stephanie, I just have a few questions. I want to ask you about who had you for 10 years. And why now? What made you leave now?" I felt angry at the question and said, "Because I couldn't other times. They had me locked up in a house. I didn't go to school. I didn't go out. I was inside all of them years thinking I'd never come out. When I came out, I felt like the sunlight was going to blind me, as I wasn't used to the sun. They kept me in a room with boards on it. I could watch TV. I read my dad's books. That's why I could read, because that's the only schooling I ever had in the 10 years. The FBI agent stopped me and asked, "Your dad?" I said, "That creep who kidnapped me. He asked me to call him Dad." The agent then said, "Was there a woman with your dad who kidnapped you? And had they any other kids of their own, or like in your case, had been kidnapped?" I said no, I just remember a man and a woman kidnapped me when I was 8 and told me to call them Mom and Dad. The agent said to me in a way I knew he was trying to make me feel like he was my friend. "Okay, Stephanie, I know this is very hard for you, and I know you must be so tired from all you went through, but could you please tell me about the day you were kidnapped? Try to include every detail, please." It was a Friday night. I know because the man who told me to call him Dad kept shouting about his high school football team winning. Before you ask me their name, I forget, but I just know that it was a Friday night lights and all. I was coming home from my friend Lucy's house. It was about 5 p.m, and a man pulled up in a car and told me that my mom, my real mom, asked him to pick me up. I found it strange knowing I just lived 10 minutes down the road. I spent what seemed like hours telling the agent what happened and the description of the people that asked me to call them Mom and Dad. A week passed and I was settling into my old home. My parents were so happy to have me home. My mom told me that she spent years and years looking for me and put up missing posters all over town. I felt it strange after a few days that neither was asking for a DNA test. I was hoping they wouldn't, but I still felt surprised. It usually took just a few weeks, in some cases only a few days. I had to up and leave from pretending to be a family's long lost daughter, and then up and leaving before that damn DNA test ruined it. That day I left, there was no man that asked me to call me Dad. When I was 8, I just had enough of the teachers and social workers trying to tell me I was crazy for attacking the damn kids in school. They were so annoying anyway. They made me so angry I bit them. It was when I ran away and did what I did, I could really express my emotions, but no one would accept them. It's not that I was able to stay around any family long enough for them to even notice my odd behaviour. I used to check out social media pages and missing children sites and get all the information I needed to pretend to some grieving parents I was their long lost daughter. If only they didn't bother with that damn DNA test, then I wouldn't have had to run away. I would have given them hope, and hope is good, right? There's nothing wrong with hope. But one night I was down in the woods, and there was this guy I was making out with. It was a perfect chance for me to indulge in my favourite pastime, so I bit him in his neck and tasted his blood. As I was sucking his blood, I could see the new man I chose to pretend was my dad standing in front of me. He wasn't shocked, he just stared right at me. I was wondering, what the hell is he not shocked at me biting into a guy's neck and sucking his blood? Then he said, "You should really hide your diary better. I read all about what you do to poor families pretending you're their daughter. But I have some good news for you. You think you're lying to us, but of all the odds you chose us. You did. And Stephanie, you thought you were lying to us, like all those other parents. But Stephanie, you're not lying. This time I am so happy to tell you, you are my daughter. You're home, Stephanie. I knew I didn't need a DNA test, because you see, I am like you. I am a vampire." Hello, let me tell you about a story about a detective called Mason. He had a brilliant idea for investigating crime scenes. The idea wasn't his, of course. It had been used for years and years and could have been forgotten about, but different investigators still use it when investigating crime scenes. The idea is creating a miniature model of the whole crime scene. For instance, if it was a farmhouse with 2 people and one stabbed with a knife, then create a model of that entire scene. Mason used to find it very helpful to be able to look at the model of the crime scene and go through it in his mind what could have happened. This method helped Mason solve lots of different crimes. Mason's wife Susan was a teacher in the local school and used to often worry about Mason out and about in his job, but she used to like when he was in the basement with his crime scene miniatures because she knew he was safe at home and wasn't in the way of any criminal that could harm him or worse, kill him. One day there was a murder in the school and Mason had to do a miniature of the hallway by the lockers where the murder took place. He knew that there was just lockers, a school bag and a boy that seemed to have been hit by a hammer. Mason was working hard trying to figure out what he could see in it. Sometimes he wondered, was it harder there being a lot to the scene or less? But he knew one thing, that no matter how much there was in the scene or how little, it seemed to help him having a miniature model. That night Mason seemed to have had a nightmare and woke up feeling agitated after it. He got up to get a glass of water. On his way, by accident, he knocked against his wife's handbag and it fell to the floor, with some of its contents spilt out on the floor. He froze in fear when he saw what he saw staring up at him from the floor. It was a hammer with what looked like blood on the top. He looked back at the bed, hoping Susan wouldn't wake up. He put it together. Susan had been talking about a boy who was constantly bullying her behind people's backs, and she was afraid to tell anyone because she felt they would think she had no control over her students. Mason knew the student was hit with a blunt object, which was very highly likely to be the hammer. Mason felt movement from the bed and quickly put the hammer back into Susan's bag. He went down to the kitchen and drank some water, and then walked back to the basement and looked at the miniature model. He imagined Susan striking the student on the head with a hammer, and knew that he heard the CCTV footage was missing, and that would be explained by Susan being able to have access to it to delete it. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Suddenly he heard movement behind him and looked around. His wife Susan was standing next to him with a miniature model of himself lying in a pool of blood. She put the miniature model of him down on the ground and said, "Well, Mason, I was really hoping it wouldn't come to this, where I have to finish this miniature crime scene, but it looks like I'll have to make the background or basement." She pulled out a gun and shot Mason in his head. 6 months later, Susan was speaking at the book launch of her bestseller called My Husband is Gone, But I Continued His Passion. She spoke into the mic with emotion. "I am here today talking about my book, which is a way of me coping with the murder of my hard-working husband, who was passionate about figuring out ways of solving crimes by using miniature crime scene models. The title is long, but I couldn't think of any other appropriate title to use other than My Husband is Gone, But I Continued His Passion. My husband was such a loving man, and the only time I was truly content with him working on his investigations was when he was in the basement working on his miniature crime scene models. After my husband died, I tried to harness my emotions into making a miniature crime scene of him in honor of him. I would love if my husband was still alive and I didn't have to write this book, but I want to speak out to the many wives of men like my husband. Don't take a day for granted, because if your husband is working in a dangerous line of work like mine was, then his life could be snuffed out at any minute." The crowd were lapping up Susan's speech, and Susan was enjoying knowing she would get lots of royalties from her books and TV appearances, etc., and her bully was out of the way. She paused for a moment, thinking to herself, "I didn't want to appear a pushover teacher by saying I couldn't control my student, and I didn't want to harm my loving husband, but I had to. I wasn't a murderer, so it's better I got a book deal and wasn't cut out as the murderer. They would think I was some sort of psycho." She saw a fly land in her hand and thought to herself, "After all, I wouldn't hurt a fly." The relationship between me and my wife had turned strange a couple of weeks ago, and I am not sure what happened exactly. A month and a half ago, my wife came screaming into the living room, shoving a picture into my face. She kept on shouting, "Who is this younger woman you were with?" And I calmly told her that the younger woman was her. She then looked at the picture and realized that it was her when she was in her early 20s. We were both in our 40s now, and she cried and apologized, and we made up. Then, a couple of days later, she barged into our bedroom and was shouting at me to explain the photo of me with a younger woman. I tried explaining to her that the younger woman in the photo was her when she was younger. She had a knife in her hand, but I kept control of that hand that she had gripped the knife with. She then realised that the young woman in the photo was actually her. Something wasn't right, and I decided to go through some old photos together of both of us in our younger days. As we were going through the old photo book, my wife would scream and shout at me in a murderous tone every time she saw me in a photo with her when we were younger. Then she would apologise when she realised it was herself in the photo, and it was incredibly unusual. Then I started doing it myself. As we were looking through the old photo book, I would go angry and accuse my wife of cheating when I would see a photo of her with a younger man, but the younger man is me. I would then apologise straight away. Going through that old photo book had constantly made me and my wife shout at each other and accuse one another of cheating, until we both realise it is just our younger selves. We have burnt all photos. Hello, my name is Darren. I have loads of people telling me that I am crazy because I tell them that I can make people do things and hypnotise them, etc. I wouldn't stoop to the level of recording myself, making them act silly without their knowledge, etc. Because if they don't believe me in my gifts, that's their problem, not mine. I'm not going to record them so they can look back at them acting stupid and having no recollection of it. No, if they don't believe me, that is their problem. My girlfriend was arguing with me for weeks about going to see a psychologist. I wouldn't even film myself using my gifts on her, as the same applies for her. If she doesn't believe me, then that's her problem, not mine. But I gave in to her arguing and eventually went to see a psychologist. My girlfriend drove me to the psychologist, and there wasn't a word spoken on the way there in the car. I was angry that my own girlfriend didn't believe in my powers. When I was sitting down in the psychologist's room, I felt betrayed that I had to sit here in front of someone who didn't even know me and, like everyone else, probably thinks I'm crazy. The psychologist was an annoying-looking man who said to me, "Hello, Darren. My name is Frederick Ryan. I am sure you will feel a lot better after our session. But first, please tell me why you are here today." I said, "I am here because everyone doesn't believe me that I have powers to make people do things against the will without them even realising it. They have no recollection whatsoever of doing it. I am not filming anyone or anything to prove I have the gift." The psychologist said, "Well, Darren, I am sure you must realise why people are so reluctant in believing you. I mean, especially when they have no recollection of doing so. But Darren, I'm sure there is a good reason why you feel like you are actually doing these things. But in reality, they're just in your imagination. And when you come to the realisation that you're just imagining these powers, then things will start coming together a lot easier in the puzzle." The session lasted about 30 minutes. When I was out of the building, I checked my phone to see the live stream I had of me making him dance around his office like an idiot without even realising it. I laughed. I knew it was just me that filmed him, and just me that will be able to watch this video. I got a thrill when I saw myself confess to making a person who annoyed me stab themselves with my powers. But then I switched back to the live feed and forwarded it up to real time, right now. I didn't realise that he had actually been recording me also. Maybe he records all his subjects, but I could hear our conversation come out of his laptop speakers. I could see his face go weird when I was confessing about the murder. He then was getting his phone ready to make a call, more than likely the police. I used my powers to him bang the phone off his head over and over and over until it was a bloody mess, and he fell down on the floor, dead. Sam was on social media for a few years now, but didn't get half of the views he would have liked. He decided to hatch a plan to gain loads of followers and viewers. His plan consisted of him driving a taxi that he usually does, but something different for a live stream. He rigged the taxi with lots of cameras to film his customers. He had something very different planned for them. That difference was that he would have a needle in the back seat full of poison, and each customer who gets in would be killed from the poison going into their back. The needle tips were spread all over the back, so no matter where they would sit, they would get jabbed. He murdered about 10 people when his live stream went up to about 100,000 views. The local sheriff of Sam's town got tipped off after the 5th person was killed, so he was tracking the car by people giving tips of what was in the background of the live stream, giving away where it was originating from, even though Sam was constantly on the move apart from stopping for customers. The viewers helping the police eventually knew Sam seemed to be driving to his house. A while later there was a SWAT team outside Sam's house, and they knew from the live stream he was in the garage. He could see he was holding a gun up to people, and the SWAT team broke the garage door down and shouted, "Stop!" Sam jumped with fright, and one of the police officers' guns went off and shot Sam between the eyes. Then 10 of his victims came out shouting and screaming. The detective was relieved the poison in the needle didn't kill them, but must have just put them to sleep. Then things got worse than he could ever have imagined. When one of the people said, "Oh my God, why did you shoot Sam? We are all actors. This has all been a stunt. None of us were killed. Those needles were just rubber. They weren't real needles. We were just helping Sam stage a fake, crazy live stream of him killing people." The sheriff checked Sam's pulse. He was dead, and they realized he was guilty of staging a fake mass murder spree. Tracy was very upset after her husband went missing 20 years ago. Her husband Barry was only 30 when he disappeared. Tracy still used to sit crying, looking through photo albums of better times. She used to find it hard to look at photos of her and her husband, but she wanted to keep his memory alive. Tracy tried different techniques to contact her husband. She visited a psychic and even had a seance, but nothing worked. Lately, she had a huge urge to dig a hole in her garden at a particular spot. She went out one day into the spot where she had the urge to dig and began digging. She didn't know where she was getting her energy from, but she kept on digging and digging and digging. It eventually got too dark, so she had to call it a day. The next morning she was out doing the same thing, digging and digging and digging, until eventually when she was over 30 feet down, she came across a door. She wondered what was the door doing over 30 feet underground. She turned the doorknob, expecting it to be just the door stuck in the dirt. But to her surprise, she opened it to a beautiful landscape. She thought she was dreaming. Then a man that looked familiar stood in front of her and said, "You bitch." Tracy couldn't believe her eyes, but knew that the man standing next to her was her husband Barry, who would now be 50. Then suddenly Tracy woke up, thinking what a strange dream. The first thing she'd done, even though she knew it was a dream, was go out to the garden where she dug the huge hole in the dream. Of course there was no hole, but she thought of something. What if she dug a little? Not 30 feet, but just a little. She had the urge to dig, and she knew she was awake this time. A few minutes later she began digging. She hit something hard and got a start. She bent down on her knees and took away dirt, revealing a hand. Then it all came back to her, guessing the dream had unopened the repressed memory of her killing and burying her husband. It was a lovely summer's day, and me and my friend were taking a trip in my private helicopter. Everything was going great. We were enjoying the view until we started to fly over my house. I noticed something strange. It was like a masked man was carrying my wife to my outside pool to throw her in. I quickly told my friend, "Look below, what's going on? Do you see down below? There's someone carrying my wife into the pool." I quickly flew the helicopter down and saw that a masked man was carrying my wife, and just as he got low, we could see him throw her into the pool. He ran away, and when the helicopter eventually landed, he was well gone. I ran over to the pool and jumped in, but by the time I did, my wife had already drowned. My friend rang the police for me, and when they came, I told them what had happened. We were flying over my house when all of a sudden I could see a masked man carrying my wife and throwing her into the pool. They asked did I have any enemies, but I couldn't think of any. My wife was in the bat, and I walked in, knowing what I had to do. I grabbed her by the neck and put her under the water until she stopped breathing. Then, when I knew she had died, I rang the girl of my dreams, who kept at me the last few months to end it with my wife once and for all. It was her plan. When she answered the phone, I told her what to do. "It's done, she's dead, but what you need to do is wait until about 3 p.m. tomorrow, dress up as a man, put your hair up, I'll convince my friend you're a man, carry my wife, I'll fly over the house in the helicopter, and when you see us go lower, run up to the swimming pool. I'll fly over the house in the helicopter, and when you see us go lower, run up to the swimming pool as if my wife was alive until you threw her into the pool. If they think it's a man that drowned her in the swimming pool, there is no way they will trace the real drowning back to me drowning her in the bat. And remember, the most important thing, baby, is I love you." It was a summer's night in a downtown theatre that 5 people were alone together in the theatre. Alone because they were rehearsing for a very, very dangerous magic trick for the next night. They acted everything out as if the theatre had a packed house. Sam Days was a hugely popular magician and was trying a really elaborate trick. The trick was to give his helper a gun and to her shoot him and him catch the bullet in his mouth. And to make it harder, if he didn't catch it with his mouth, it would go straight through his mouth and out the back of his head, hitting a barrel of gasoline. The bullet was an expanding bullet, which meant it would penetrate his skull if he didn't catch the bullet. Sam's hostess, Sherry, was standing on the stage with him. The other three were in the audience watching. They would take part in other magic tricks after. Sam walked on the stage and said, "Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you all to the wonderful world of magic. I am your host, Sam, and this is my beautiful helper, Sherry. For my first trick, tonight I am going to do a very, very dangerous trick. It is so dangerous that there have been several people killed from attempting it. I am going to put a twist to it even. I have a barrel full of gasoline put behind me, and Sherry is going to shoot me with a special bullet that expands. So if I don't catch this bullet with my mouth, it will be game over for me, and, well, you all better run for the hills, because it will go right through the barrel and cause a mighty big explosion. So, I'll just get on with the act, shall I?" Sam smiled and gave a gun to Sherry and walked back to stand in front of the barrel. Sam said, "Ready when you are?" Sherry held up the gun and pulled the trigger. The bullet went through the air and everyone gasped when Sam couldn't catch the bullet and the barrel went up in flames. They all looked shocked with horror as Sam burned with it. Suddenly, before anyone could call the police, there was another gunshot, and Sherry fell to the floor as someone had just shot her. Jack was sitting down waiting for his call and noticed Ginny and Patrick, the remaining two people, were gone. He knew there were just 5 of them in the theatre as they locked the door after entering, which meant the killer had to be either Ginny or Patrick, the only 2 remaining besides himself. Suddenly there was a noise behind him, and he jumped up from his seat. It was Ginny and Patrick. Patrick said, "What in the name of God is there a fire for?" Jack was so shocked he had forgotten all about the fire. Patrick ran up on the stage and fetched the fire hose to put the fire out. He had just seen Sherry lying down on the ground dead and screamed but ran over to put the fire out still. Jack said to Ginny, "Which one of ye killed Sherry? What the hell is happening?" Ginny said, "Sherry is dead. What the hell happened, Jack?" Jack said, "This is madness. I'm calling the police." He picked out his phone to call the police. He told them what had happened and to come fast. After a few minutes, finally, Patrick had the fire put out and saw the burnt body of Sam. He walked down to where Ginny and Jack were sitting. Jack said to Patrick, "Where the hell were you? It could have been only either 2 of ye, the killer." Patrick said, "Are you crazy? None of us killed anyone. There must be someone else in here." 10 minutes had passed, and the police hadn't arrived. Jack got up to walk up and down the theatre. Ginny whispered to Patrick, "Something isn't right. I don't think he rang the police." Suddenly there was a shot, and Ginny screamed as Patrick was shot in the head. Ginny looked around, terrified, when she saw Jack run up to her and shout, "What did you do?" Ginny shouted, "I didn't do anything. It was you who shot him." The police suddenly arrived, and Ginny told them everything that happened, and about Jack shooting him. She didn't see him shoot him, but it had to be him. There was no one else in the theatre. Jack was arrested, and after some investigation and speaking with the theatre's owner, they learned that the owner's jewellery worth $10 million had been stolen from his safe, which was opened with his key. He told the police that Jack must have used some magic trick to retrieve the key from him. Sam Days was missed dearly by his fans, but little did they know he pulled off his biggest trick by staging his own death by falling down a trapdoor when the blast happened, knowing there was already a scorched body inside the barrel with gasoline. He didn't want to kill Sherry and Patrick, but had to, as he stupidly told them about his fantasy about stealing the theatre's owner's key and open the safe and steal the jewellery and live the high life. He knew if he hadn't killed them, they would tell the police, and plus he knew now that Jack got all the blame, which suited him fine, as that sneaky Jack had tried to constantly best him in magic tricks, but now he won't ever be able to best him. Sam smiled, lying on a beach, knowing he finally pulled off his best magic trick, the ultimate disappearing act, his fake death. Two police officers were driving down the road on a quiet summer night when they spotted something strange. There was a car stopped at the side of the road, but it was in a position that a car shouldn't stop in since it was out in the middle of the road. Two of the police officers walked around to the car to investigate, and they nearly got sick when they realized what they saw. They had seen a woman lying lifeless inside the car with towels stuffed into her body and most of her organs removed. One of the police officers turned around and got sick, but the other was more experienced and was used to seeing sick things, so he just took out his notebook and started writing down notes. Then he rang back to the station to call in the crime scene. The police officers wondered what type of sick person could do that to anyone. They wondered, was it some dark ritual or even a sacrifice taking the baby out of the body, because there were really strange stories around the town for years and years of witchcraft rituals in the woods, and this road was by the woods. When they went back to investigate more looking into the car, they felt a strange presence, and when they looked back into the back seat, they froze in fear of what they saw. They turned around and saw a baby stare at them, and not cry or whimper, but they still knew the baby was alive. They couldn't comprehend how the baby got into the car, and also wondered how the baby could have survived being taken out of the mother's body. The two officers seemed to be in a daze. When they took the baby out of the car, one of the officers realized there was a newspaper article stuck in the baby's hand. It was as if the baby was clutching onto it for dear life. The newspaper article was about a serial killer that died in prison 2 days ago, and before his death he became obsessed with being reborn through a human sacrifice. It sounded sick, so he didn't read on. One of the officers had a crazy idea he didn't tell anyone, but since he had the opportunity he went ahead with it, and knew people in the right places, so he got someone to run a DNA test on the baby. A shiver ran up his spine when he realized a hit came up on file, which was the same match as the murderer who wrote the notes about being reborn through a human sacrifice. Jack was speaking to a witch doctor when he was visiting Africa. He asked him could he make a voodoo doll, and the witch doctor said, of course. All he would need was the person's clothes and hair to be put on the doll. The witch doctor performed a ritual on the doll to it have the voodoo powers, and all Jack had to do was get the hairs and clothes from whoever it was he wanted the voodoo doll to be. Himself and his wife were visiting Africa with his friend Jerry. Jerry was having an affair with his wife. He knew the voodoo doll would be the perfect revenge, so when Jerry was asleep, he cut some hair from him and took some of his clothes to cut up and put around the doll. He had it planned to burn the doll so Jerry would burn to death. He had the voodoo doll tucked away, safe under his bed, waiting until Jerry was in his room. When Jack tried to put on the light, he realized the electricity must have been off. He took out his lighter and put the doll over a bin and set it alight. He then screamed as he went on fire himself, and Jerry walked into the room holding Jack's diary and said to Jack while he was burning, "Never let your diary lying around if you're planning on killing someone with a voodoo doll. I read all about your plan and knew it would be dark by the time you wanted to do your little voodoo murder. So what I did was cut your hair while you were asleep last night and took some of your clothes and cut off the electricity so you couldn't see how the doll had changed to your clothes instead of mine. So burn in hell, Jack."